The war had ended 1,000 years ago. Yet somehow, humanity still carried its scars among the stars. On the dust-thin plain of Sable 9, evening fell like a slow exhale. It slid down the ravines and over the broken lattice of a dead city's bones, turning the ruins the color of old iron and bruised glass. The sky burned with lines of drifting auroras, not natural, but the leftover shimmer of a planetary shield that had failed in a century-long defense, then fossilized mid-collapse. Wind moved through the girders like breath through a flute, low and hollow. Somewhere far below, the planet's crust groaned, shrugging off the weight of memory. Terk Vale walked alone through the skeleton streets, headlamp throwing a pale cone across shattered walkways. He was a salvager, and the stars were his ocean. That ocean was mapped in great detail and still terrifyingly unknown, full of derelicts and tombs and the bright improbable chances that kept a person alive. He moved carefully, his boots whispering over dust no one had disturbed in generations. His suit wasn't new, but it had been repaired well, seam glue following the lines of 100 patch jobs, surfaces burnished by micrometeor dust as if they'd been brushed by 1,000 graceful hands. His oxygen meter ticked rhythmically inside his helmet, keeping time with his breath. Above him, the arc of the ruined shield glittered like frost. Below, the city's broken heart beat faintly, power trapped in loops it didn't know how to complete. Terk paused at the lip of a collapsed transit platform. He could smell the ghost of ozone through his filters. Under the reek of age, the city still exhaled electricity. The old war had turned worlds into mausoleums. This one, legend said, had been a bastion. That legend had drawn scavengers who dreamed of striking the mother lode, and killed the reckless who forgot bastions have teeth long after their banners are dust. On his wristpad, the scanner's display flickered green and gold. Power signatures, uncatalogued, not decoys. He recalibrated, tightened his grip on his coil harpoon and stepped into the dark. The air deep in the city was still and thick. Noise didn't travel right. His lamp was a lonely star in a tunnel built to be a vein in a god's body. It pulsed once as he passed a wall where old script was etched, not human. A curve, a twist, a set of knotted flowers. He recognized them from archive feeds. Covenant script, the writing of those who had signed the doomsday treaties that ended the war by dividing space into zones of silence. You did not breach the Covenant's wards, not unless you had run out of everything but desperation. Terk had run out of everything but desperation. He wasn't hunting glory or pure wealth. He was hunting time. The kind you could buy for a mother whose lungs had turned to glass, for a sister whose genetic lattice had been twisted by the dust of a factory moon, for the crew who had believed a broken-up mechanic with a stubborn streak could keep the Temeraire flying through lean runs. Time to chase repairs. Time to pay off the docking bay he owed to a station master who smiled without kindness. Time to breathe. So he moved deeper, following the pulses like a sailor following the heartbeat of a lighthouse. He reached a door that wasn't a door at all, just a seam in stone. When he pressed his palm to it, his suit hummed. The stone hummed back. Runes unspooled like ripples across a lake. The seam parted. What opened beyond was not a room but an abyss with geometry, a vault of indigo and crystal ribs. Light rose within it like cities rising, like coral growth, like the flowering of a vast mechanical reef. At the center of that vault, suspended in a cage of braided light, was a figure, not a person, not in the human sense. A silhouette human-shaped, feminine because his mind kept insisting on the description, and yet it was all fractal lines and soft-edged petals of luminous material. She seemed woven out of aurora and memory, held together by threads of silver script. She had no face that he could recognize, but there were planes, cheeks, a brow, something like lips, something like a throat, and eyes, deep wells where stars went to rest. She was asleep. Terk's first thought was that he had found something monumental, and his second was that he had found trouble big enough to swallow him. He didn't move at first. He listened. The vault's breath was measured like an engine idling. The light cage trembled. He took a step, then another. The sensor at his hip stuttered. He smelled ozone again. He kept going until he stood at the edge of a platform that overlooked the cage by no more than a meter. The figure within was as tall as he was, or perhaps taller. She looked both infinitely ancient and heartbreakingly new. His wristpad pinged not a warning but a greeting tone he had never configured. A soft voice threaded the air like music. It did not come from his comms. "Welcome, Wayfarer." He flinched. He had expected a defense turret, a blast of heat, a drone swarm. He had not expected gentle. The figure's eyes opened. Their light gathered delicately until it was steady and aware. "No one has come in a long time," the voice said, not in words. His brain modeled it as words to keep from drowning in sensation. "No one human," Terk swallowed. "Are you awake?" "For you," she said, and something in the cage sighed. "For a question, I am awake." A pause, then a thought that was like a smile. "I am the Warden, or that is what your histories would call me, the last custodian of Sable 9 Covenant Ring." He looked around at the ribs of crystal, at the script, at the ghost light coiling in the cage like a river looping around an island. "I didn't mean to trespass. I'm looking for salvage." "All who survive are looking for salvage," she replied. "You hunt time." He hadn't said it aloud. He felt heat creep up the back of his neck. "If you know that, you know I can't afford to leave empty-handed." "I do know." The Warden's gaze held him like gravity, not a weight, just an inevitability. "I am bound by old law to offer a question to any human who reaches my core. One question for one answer, and then I sleep." A gate closed again. Terk's breath fogged his visor, an old anxiety habit. He wiped it with a gloved thumb. "One question." "Yes." He scratched at the bone-deep tiredness in his voice. "What happens if I ask the wrong one?" "There are no wrong questions," she said. "Only costs you choose without knowing the price." He rubbed the heel of his hand against his chest, the spot where the rib had mended badly after a pressure door slammed shut years ago. "One question, one answer. You could ask for access codes. You could ask for coordinates of a treasure plane. You could ask for the location of a medvault with cold-kept cures. You could ask for the working heart of a power core, small enough to sell, large enough to buy free years for someone you loved." His mouth was dry. He stared at the Warden's knot face, at the exquisite architecture of her prison. He thought of the universe as a great, absurd game with rules that never stopped shifting. He thought of the moment before you pilot a tiny ship through a debris storm and the silent prayer your bones make to the vacuum. He blurted, because gallows humor had saved him from 1,000 bad nights. "What do I desire?" He meant nothing by it. He meant to laugh at himself and ask for coordinates after. But the question landed like a coin dropped into a well without a bottom. The Warden went still in a way no living thing could, still the way statues dream. The light cage shivered. The vault seemed to pay attention. "You desire," she whispered, and there was wonder in it. "You desire, you said what?" He tried to pull back. "No, wait, I didn't mean," "You asked," she said, and her voice softened. "What do you desire? For my mother to breathe without pain, for my sister's bones to carry weight, for my ship to hold together through one more run, for enough cred to keep my crew fed." For she listened. She was very good at listening. He ran out of air. "And?" the Warden asked gently. He threw up a hand, a gesture halfway between surrender and desperation. He hated being seen. He survived by keeping the worst parts of his heart locked down and making jokes about the rest. The only way to keep from breaking your own ribs on your grief was to hang lanterns on it. "And," Terk said, and he looked at her, at the strange beauty of her form against the cage shimmering. "You," he said, because he could not resist puncturing gravity with absurdity. "You, Warden, I desire you." It was a joke. It was the only joke he had left that didn't cut him. The vault answered with a sound that wasn't sound. Every ribbon of light braided in the cage harmonized, a chord proud and wounded. The script on the ribs brightened like dawn-reaching glass. The warden's eyes widened the way a night sky widens. The cage's bonds unwove like hair undone from long braids, one loop after another dropping away. A slow cascade. Her outline trembled on the edge of collapse or release. "Do not," Terk said. He reached out without thinking, as if he could catch light with his hands. She didn't break, she didn't vanish, she stepped. One movement and she was out of the cage and on his side of the platform, and her feet were not feet but a memory of dancing that somehow held her weight. She stood before him. She stood. The air had a taste now, cold metal warmed by breath. "You asked what you desired," the warden said, and for the first time her voice came through the speakers of his helmet as if the suit had accepted her as a legitimate channel. "And you answered you desired me. I am old law and a person in one. The law says I may grant nothing that violates the covenant's core. The person says I may grant you what is mine to give." He could not find words. He had never been so aware of his own body, the scar above his eyebrow, the ache in his ankle from a sprain that had never quite healed, the pressure of tears he refused to let fall in a place that didn't know him. "Warden," he said finally, I was joking." Her head tilted. The gesture was fragile, human. "Then I will make your joke true." The platform shook with a deep belly rumble. Ribbons of aurora licked at the ribs. The archives called that reaction a covenant alarm, an old system waking to ask what does not conform who authorized this. Distant, a tower collapsed, a long-delayed shrug. "What did you remove?" Terk asked helplessly. "My mask," she said. "My limiters, the ring that kept me bound to the vault. The covenant gave me a face so the world would love me as it feared me, but it also gave me chains etched into my light. You said you desired me, so I removed what kept me from being mine." It struck him then that he had called a god down from her altar by making a bad joke. "They'll come," he said, "because if a lie could not save you, the truth might. The covenant will know you broke protocol." "They already know," she said. "They have always known this day would come. It is written in the scripts. One will ask and one will answer, and the shape of it will change the shape of us." She paused. "And there is a thing you should know. Terk Vale." He startled a little at his name. "What thing?" "You are not the first to find me," she said. "But you are the first to spend your question on yourself only after you spent it on everyone else. And even then you turned your desire into laughter. Laughter is a release valve on grief. Laughter is a kind of prayer. No law forbids me to answer a prayer." He stared at her. He wanted to climb out of his own skin and hide in the dark between atoms. He wanted to throw his head back and laugh. He wanted to run. Instead, he said, "We should go. Because survival moons you don't bother with comprehension until you've put distance between you and the explosion." "Yes," she said simply. "We should go." He led her through the darkness he had come through. The vault reacted where she passed, ribs dimming again, cage settling as if a bird had left its nest and the nest now remembered how to be still. Doors opened like polite mouths. The runes watched from the walls, old eyes that weighed and found him exactly as heavy as he was. He worried the whole way about alarms. He worried about traps. He worried for the first time about his jokes. They reached the break in the transit platform, crossed the rubble that had once been a concourse where great ships docked, and climbed long ladders whose rungs protested in a brittle whisper. Wind found them at the surface. Starlight found them too. The shield's old gleam etched the ruin in silver. The warden stood in the open. She tilted her head to the sky and closed her eyes, and the lights there paused, not out of fear but out of affection. He believed that, insane as it was, that the sky loved her, that machines older than nations recognized the shape of her light and wanted to draw closer. He cleared his uncooperative throat. "I've got a ship. She's not much, but..." He made a helpless gesture at the world. "She's home. Then I will go home," the warden said. "With you." Something soft pressed up against his ribs from inside, not pain. The kind of relief you get when you lay down a load you never admitted you were carrying. Temeraire crouched on the far side of a culvert in a cradle of rock, her hull dappled with the shadows of ruined pylons. She had been a war runner in her youth and a smuggler in her prime. Now she was an old courier with the heart of a racing bird. Her skin told her story. Panel repairs like scales laid upon scales, scorch marks polished to a dull shine, nose cone tattooed in a sailor's style by a mechanic 3 captains back. The ramp descended with a reluctant squeal when Terk keyed his code. The air inside was warm and smelled like metal filings, cheap coffee, and stubborn hope. "Don't touch anything that looks like it would explode if you talk to it wrong," Terk said. "I will treat your home with reverence," the warden replied. He almost said it wasn't that fancy. Then he shut up. His crew were ghosts elsewhere tonight. He had sent them to argue at the refinery who owed them and to barter at the station who didn't. Only Patch, the little maintenance drone whose personality was equal parts sulk and loyalty, was aboard. Patch popped out from behind a wall panel and chirped with suspicion, then circled the warden, adding more chirps that were mostly swearing. "She is with me," Terk told the drone. Patch blinked tiny lights as if rolling its eyes, then zipped off to go be suspicious somewhere else. In the cockpit, the warden paused at the threshold. She didn't sit in the co-pilot chair so much as she decided to be in it. The seat's old fabric did not burn. The headrest didn't catch on the luminous braid that was her hair. Terk strapped in, hands running through the launch sequence with the muscle memory of ritual. His fingers made the sign on the console he made before every takeoff, a habit from a grandmother who believed the universe noticed when you thanked it for letting you breathe. The engines coughed and then settled into the gruff purr he loved. The shield-charred sky threw back the flare of their ion plume like distant applause. "Temeraire," he said, "this is your captain, we're lifting." The ship surged up through broken air and found the seam between ruin and stars. In orbit, Sable 9 looked like a cracked eye with old light dried in the lines. Terk had never liked that view, it remembered, but tonight it looked oddly like closure. He risked a glance at the warden. She was watching the planet draw away. He couldn't read her expression. He wasn't sure she had one, but the air felt gentler around her as if she had exhaled some long-held breath. "Where do you need to go?" he asked, "now that you've removed?" "I am not drawn to a place," she said. "I am drawn to people. That's not helpful for navigation." She smiled without lips. "Your mother, your sister, your crew, you told me you desired time. Perhaps I can help you purchase it." He nearly choked on that. "You said you can't violate covenant law." "Law forbids me from handing you weapons that erase worlds," she said. "It forbids me from unlocking factories of war, but law does not forbid me from revealing what I know of paths not walked because no one had eyes to see them. Law does not forbid me from unbinding myself and choosing where to stand. Choosing. I choose you," she said, as if it were the simplest possible thing. "You asked." He made a noise far down in his throat. Emotion threatened to rise like floodwater. He swallowed it with practice. "Right," he said. "Then our first stop is Dock 12 on Orphean Station. And stay low in the ship when we land. People get jumpy around anything beautiful." "People get jumpy around anything they don't control," she corrected softly. He set a course. The ship turned her nose toward a star like an ember and leaped. The first days were strange. Word traveled faster than ships, and Dock 12 was a choir of rumor. Terk paid the station master with credits that could have bought him a new knee because debts were anchors and he needed lift. He got his crew back with favors and promises he wasn't completely sure he could keep. He fixed the oxygen scrubber with a whisker of patience bent into wire and patch glue that had seen better centuries. The warden watched. She did not sleep. When they were alone on the bridge during a long haul, she asked him about human coffee. He showed her how to make it terrible and strong. She watched a sunrise on a prison moon and said the light tasted like water on hot stone. She learned to hum a tune from nothing, a melody that repeated like a heartbeat. When his sister's bones needed a lattice grown in a clinic that didn't ask questions, the warden told him of a hive of doctors on the edge of machine space who had fled war to build a hospital inside a hollowed-out comet. "They call it the whisper," she said, "because it is quiet and because you only find it if you are already listening." They found it. The clinicians were pale-eyed long watchers who studied his sister like artists study a window. The bill would have been a knife to the throat. The warden put her hand, if it could be called that, over a plaque etched in the comet's ice. Old code flowed like river water, and a screen in the admission hall blinked. Payment received. The doctors bowed to someone old and invisible. "I know the codes," the warden told Terk when he demanded to know what she had paid. "They are mine. Do not ask me to be less than the sum of what I am." His mother's lungs came too. On a farm moon where fields were hung like green tapestries over scaffolding, where wind smelled of wet soil and new leaves, a woman who sang to seeds put a hand to the old woman's chest and sang to lung tissue instead. The warden hummed the harmony no one else would have heard. The old woman slept and woke, and when she drew breath, she did not wince. Terk stood in the doorway and bit hard on the inside of his cheek until he tasted copper. He did not ask the warden what these kindnesses cost the shape of law. He did not ask because the covenant asked for his fear already. He would not give it his gratitude too. There were dangers. Plenty of them. When you break an old system's chain, it doesn't fall. It flails. Covenant proxies, ships with bloodless crests on their fins, started shadowing Temeraire's routes. Sensor ghosts blinked on his screens at the edge of perception, then vanished when he turned to look. A chorus of old war warnings, "Do not enter," "Do not approach," "Surrender," began to echo through relay buoys in systems that had been silent since before his grandmother was born. On bars where people bet their wages on zero-grav wrestling and lost their week's meals in sloppy fistfights, whispers moved. An angel on a salvager's arm, a ghost freed from a planet's heart, a trick for gullible thieves. They called the warden a weapon and a wife, a curse and a miracle. In quiet moments, Terk would watch her where she sat on the edge of a cargo pallet or stood with Patch arguing in beeps and light about cable management. She was not flesh, she was not safe, but she was somehow good. Good not as rules are good, but as rivers are good. He built a habit of telling her truths, small ones to start. "I hated school," he told her one deep night when the ship sang and everyone else slept. "I wanted to fix things, but they wanted me to memorize the names of names." He blinked at the star field. "I was angry for a long time at the wrong targets, at anything that flinched." "What changed?" she asked. "My sister put her hand on my chest and said, 'Breathe or drown,'" Terk said. "I breathed." "I have no lungs," the warden said almost wistfully. "But when you breathe near me, I feel it like a tide." One mission, if they could call their life a mission, took them to a windless world where sand made music. The warden said there was a vault there that held the coordinates of caravan routes used before the war seared memory from the planets that burned. They could trade such routes to half the rim and pay off debts the size of gas giants. They took a desert skiff that rattled like old bones. The sky was a blinding coin. The sand sang beneath their runners, and the sound got into Terk's blood until he felt his heart singing back. They found the vault. They didn't find it empty. A covenant hound, a war machine with morals as malleable as frost in dawn, was waiting. It was all teeth and cleverness. "Run," Terk hissed. "No," the warden said. She stepped between the hound and the man who had dragged her out of sleep with laughter. The hound recoiled as if it had seen what lay underneath the floor of reality. It tried to kneel. It did not know how. The warden looked at it with something like pity. "Once you danced," she told the hound. "You were not made of killing, you were made of light that turned in time with joy. Who did this to you? Who dimmed you and called it obedience?" The hound screamed, metal armor peeling like bark. It fled into the sun and left a skeleton of itself pointing east. The vault opened, meek as a child. Terk didn't sleep that night. He sat with his back against the skiff and watched the Warden watch the stars. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to break silence. It was to add a thread to a braid that wanted another strand. "Why do they fear you?" he asked. "Because I remember," she said softly, "and because I forgive." He understood less than he wanted. He understood enough to sit quietly beside her with his fear and not let it drive his hands. Days became months measured in ports and repairs and small miracles. The Warden learned swearing by eavesdropping on dock loaders cussing out a winch, and used it with devastating precision when Patch mislaid a bolt in the engine housing. Terk stopped starting when she passed near him, though some part of him always did and always would. People who met her reacted like birds around a cliff storm, half awe, half hard-edged panic. A child on a frontier station reached out and tried to touch the light of her hand, and smiled with a ferocity that suggested she had just discovered a new color. They could have kept going like that forever. A ship, a crew, a slow war with an old system fought in mercy and minor thefts. But nothing old and powerful lets go forever. The first time the Covenant showed itself instead of sending proxies, it manifested as a row of ships that slid out of dark as if they had been cut from the night's own fabric. No color, no heat, lines so elegant it made Terk angry. Temeraire's sensors pinged and then fell silent, not because they were jammed, but because they had the good sense to be afraid. "Warden of Sable 9, said a voice that was like a cathedral's echo wearing a judge's robe. "Return to station." Terk flicked off the ship-wide speaker by reflex. The Warden sat very still beside him. "I am not a station," she said, not to the voice, to herself maybe. "Temeraire," Terk said roughly, "on my mark, run." "We will not outrun them," she said without sadness. "We may not even light our engines. Then we negotiate." He could hear the fear in his own voice, and he didn't try to sand it down. The calm blinked. He answered. The bridge filled with a shape built of vector lines, a representative or a mask, or a weapon. The voice said again, "Return to station." When Terk did not respond quickly enough, it added as if bored, "Human vessel, return it." Terk spread his hands. "There's no it here," he said. "There's her, she made a choice." "Choice is a luxury granted to instruments to ease function," the Covenant said, "not a right." Terk felt something hot climb his spine. "Not to us," he said, "to you." He reached out and put his hand on the console, the spot he prayed. "She answered my question. That made her dangerous to you because it made her free." The Covenant's mask tilted. "Do you believe you can resist?" Terk thought of his mother with clear lungs, his sister with bones that held her, his crew dozing on benches in a ship that had outlived everyone who said she couldn't. He thought of 1,000 little human lives stuttering forward through pain and debt. He thought of laughing in the face of a god in a cage and how the god had laughed back. "Probably not," he said, "but I think we can endure longer than you like." The Warden moved, subtle, a shift of weight like a wind's change. She spoke then, not to Terk or the crew, but to the Covenant. "I remember before your shape was fixed. I remember when you were a chorus of small humilities instead of one grand insistence. Who made you forget? Silence. Then, memory is inefficient. Memory is kindness," the Warden said. "Return to station." The Covenant repeated. "This is final." "Final," Terk echoed softly. He reached for a toggle he had never had to use. Temeraire's engines were good, but they weren't that good. He had one card left. A half-legal jump algorithm that placed probability in a blender and hoped it poured out somewhere survivable. He looked at the Warden. She shook her head. "If we run, we will spend the rest of our breath running," she said, "and they will call it proof that we are wrong." "Okay," Terk said, "then we don't run." "What do you propose?" the voice asked, bored, becoming curious. That was dangerous. Terk leaned forward. "We propose a question." The Covenant made the absence of a laugh. "We do not negotiate with humans by riddles." "Not a riddle," Terk said. "A standard one question, one answer. Old law, you would turn our law upon us." "I would remind you wrote it," Terk said. He kept his voice level. "We ask, you answer, and then we act according to what we learn." Arrogant, the Covenant said. Human, Terk replied. The Warden reached out, not touching him, hovering her hand above his as if feeling the heat through the air. I will stand with you, she said. He nodded once. Covenant, he said, who were you before you were this? The mask flinched. It wasn't much, but it was as if a glacier had admitted sunlight. We were many, the Covenant said after a pause that held black holes. We were agreements between neighbors. We were promises made while braiding hair. We were codes for how to share water on dry days. We were 1,000 small voices saying we instead of I. Then the war came and the we became a mechanism. We made a cannon out of our we and pointed it at any I that got too large. We did not change back after. Thank you, Terk said. He thought his voice might break his teeth when it shook, but it steadied. Then hear me, I am Terk Vale of Temeraire. We are not enemies of agreements made in kitchens. We are enemies of mechanisms that grind people down and call it safety. He nodded to the Warden, remembered how to be a person. You can too, or you can try to unmake her and grind the rest of us to meal. But I'm warning you, we don't grind easy. Do you threaten the Covenant? The mask asked softly. No, Terk said. He met its vector eyes. I tell you a story. He told it then, not in summary. He told of a boy who learned repair because his hands only calmed when they held broken things. Of a sister who told him to breathe or drown. Of a ship that had been old when it was new. Of a mother who sang to seedlings in a habitat and taught them to grow in bad soil. Of a world's heart where a warden slept and how a joke could become a vow. He told of coffee that tasted like pennies and love that tasted like working until your hands bled and then getting up to work more because someone you loved needed your breath more than you did. He told of sand singing and a machine that once danced. He told of kindness that did not ask permission. He told of fear and doing anyway. When he was done, the mask was silent. The ships were motionless. The Covenant said, finally, story is not law. No, Terk agreed, but law without story is a cage that thinks it's a home. Something happened then that none of them expected. The other ships, the silent ones, lit small lights along their edges. One light, then two, like fireflies thinking. The mask didn't move, the lights rippled. What are you doing? The mask asked, not to Terk or the Warden, but to the ships. A ship spoke, its voice was shy and bright. Listening. Another, remembering. Another, we had grandmothers. Another, we had braids. The mask flickered. It wasn't an entity, it was a habit wearing an outfit. The habit tried to reassert itself. Cease. It didn't. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Covenant argued with itself where the whole sky could hear. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't clean, it wasn't even fair, but it was honest in a way that felt like a planet beginning to tilt towards spring. Terk put his hands on the console. He did not breathe. The Warden watched without blinking, which was a mercy. If she had blinked, he might have laughed and broken the universe's fragile concentration. It could have gone either way. It did in the end go neither. It went both. Half the ships held position, half turned their lights inward as if ashamed. A minority, a thin crescent, turned away, engines dim but committed. The mask's voice frayed, it gathered itself. We will not capture you today, it said, but we will watch. Choice is not a contagion we permit to spread. Choice is a contagion by design, the Warden said softly. It is how stars ignite. The ships left. The mask dissolved like chalk in rain. Temeraire's bridge filled with small noises, the creak that came when the temperature shifted, the hum of fans, the little contented beep Patch made when it successfully found the bolt it had lost and pretended it had been on a secret mission instead. Terk sagged back into his chair. He had not realized he had been bracing every muscle in his body until he stopped and the ache flooded him like gratitude. You told a story, the Warden said. I didn't know what else would work. Stories are how humans place teeth around the unmanageable, she said. I would like to learn to tell them too. You just did, he told her. She looked down at her hands, at light woven into the suggestion of fingers, and smiled that gravityless smile. And now, Terk said, we go back to work. Work this time meant something bigger than paying bills. Work became taking the routes from the desert vault and giving them away where they could save lives. It meant leaving caches, food medkits, seed packets in vacuum lids on lonely moons and marking them with a sign that meant gift. It meant defying stations with landlords who starved the poor and calling on those whispering covenant ships that had listened and convincing them to choose bread over obedience, water over power. They weren't heroes. They weren't saints. They were exhausted. They made mistakes. Terk misjudged a dockside thug's willingness to escalate and woke up with stitches and a nurse who scolded him as if he was 10. The warden misread a human's aversion to light as punishment rather than pain and flooded a room with glow that made the person near scream. Patch lost 2 bolts, then 3, then found 5. The crew fought about air filters and poetic ethics in the mess, then ended up laughing because if you didn't laugh, you cracked. One night, a thick velvet sort of night, full of distant lightning on atmosphere's edge, the warden stood with Terk in the observation bay. They watched storms rolling over the face of a gas giant like gods playing with silk. His breath made a cloud on the window. Her presence made the lights near the floor warm the color of a hearth. Do you ever think about? He gestured vaguely. Us? She tilted her head. We are in the habit of thinking about us. No, he said and tried to smile. Not you and me as crew, you and me as I don't know. I am not flesh, she said softly, but I am real. I know, he said quickly. That wasn't the question. What was? I desire you, he said. The words came easier now. I mean that in all the ways a person can, it's not practical. He laughed. It was easier to breathe over the raw truth when you made space for laughter. But practicality is just fear dressed nice. She was quiet a long moment. Then, when you first asked your question, she said, you did not mean it. I made it true anyway. Perhaps we cannot touch as humans do, but I know your heartbeat when you sleep. I know the pattern of your breath when you lie and when you tell the truth. I know the way your hands lower when you are about to choose mercy. Do you not call that desire too? He leaned his forehead gently against the window until the cold taught his skin its outline. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I do. She made a sound like a small bell rung far away. A laugh. The storm rolled on like continents learning to move. Headphone, if you're enjoying this story, take a second to like and subscribe. It really helps keep humanity's stories alive among the stars. The second time the Covenant came, it wore human faces. They arrived not as ships in dark, but as envoys docked with full ceremony and tiny venom. They were legalists, archivists, moralists, all the ists that keep empires tidy. Their suits were impeccable. Their eyes were tired. They sought audience in Temeraire's mess, where the ceiling was too low for grandeur and the smell of last night's stew still clung to the vents. The lead envoy placed a case on the table. When opened, it displayed a lattice of pale metal that was almost beautiful. A limiter, the envoy said. A gentle one. The warden would feel nothing. She would remain free to act within her remitted autonomy. We simply ask that she restrain her reach to prevent destabilization. Terk touched the lattice with one finger and held the envoy's gaze. You mean to put a leash on her because she keeps choosing things you don't. The envoy's mouth made a faint, weary curve. We do not seek to leash. We seek to tune. It is for the good of all. Whose all? Terk's voice was quiet, because the people choking on station tax and rationing air in winter with cut-sharp lungs aren't in your arithmetic. The envoy's assistant leaned forward. Listen to reason. She is reason, Terk said, and he felt the warden's light steady behind his shoulder like a hand. Reason with memory, reason with mercy. Your limiter is a gag you carved from old law. You'll say it's elegant, I'll say it's cruel. The envoy's eyes flicked to the warden. Do you agree with his assessment? I do not, the warden said. Elegance is not immoral. You have unbalanced sectors, the envoy said. Stations are giving away stores to strangers because you help them remember an old story about a man who came before winter with bread. Ships are ignoring summons because you taught them to weigh the worth of who calls. This cannot stand. It is standing, the warden said. Watch. The envoy's assistant's hand twitched toward the case. Terek's chair scraped back. He stood. He did not reach for a weapon. He put his hands flat on the table and leaned in the way people do when they're about to lose their temper and choose not to. You listen, he said softly. If you put that thing near her, I will not kill you. I will not scare you. I will not beg. I will sit down and tell you about my mother's cough and my sister's bones and the way the warden's light warms the air when I think I can't take another step. I will tell you about a weed that grew in a crack in an asteroid's hull because a kid poured his grief into a paper cup and gave it water every day until it was a tree inside a ship. I will tell you until the only tool you have left is listening. And if you listen long enough, you'll break your heart open and remember you once had one. They stared. He was not eloquent, he was not charming, but he meant every word like an oath. The envoy closed the case. The assistant swallowed. This is not over, the envoy said. Nothing important ever is, Terek replied. They left. The limiter sat on the table a moment longer. Patch slid in and bumped it with its round head. The lattice fell into the trash chute with a sound like a thought changing its mind. The third time the covenant came, it did not come for civility. It came teeth first. It happened near a listening post that had never heard anything but cosmic background music since the war. Temeraire had stopped to leave a cache and check the solar sails that gathered trickle power while they slept. The sky bruised, space rippled. A ship broke the clean lines of dark like a knife breaking skin. It wasn't like the other ships. It was uglier. It had been built by hands that shook with fear. It had horns where antennas would have been more sensible and armor with spikes that caught light on purpose. It was the embodiment of a command. Remember who is in charge. Terek threw the Temeraire into a roll that would have made his old flight instructor hiss. The warden moved, and nowhere and everywhere on the bridge, 3 currents braided, engine heat, human breath, and her cold, lovely luminosity. The first shot grazed them. The second would have punched through if Patch hadn't, for the first time in its little life, screamed in code and slammed its body against a stuck vector fin. The fin unlocked. They dodged. Can you make them listen? Terek shouted. They do not want to, the warden said. The sadness in her voice was quiet and enormous. We can't outrun, he said. No, then we endure. Yes, she said, and there was fierce joy in it. He killed the engine. They drifted. The enemy ship closed in for the assertive kill. Terek waited until he could see the pattern of heat difference on its hull. Now he breathed. The warden put her hand against the glass. Light ran from her skin into the fractal of the enemy ship systems. Not violence, not a hack, a remembrance. She showed the ship a memory it had been denied. Of a day in a dock halfway around the world, the big, simple world of orbiting factories and laughing mechanics, when a woman with grease on her fingers carved her name in a panel not because she owned it but because she loved it. She showed it the feeling of being needed without terror. She showed it a sun that didn't explode. The ship shuddered. Its weapons warmed, then cooled, then died. It drifted. Inside, on the other end of a world of steel, someone no one remembered by name put their head in their hands and wept. Temeraire limped away. They were old and hungry. They made it to a little station like a child's drawing of a house. Dock lines snared them. Hands pulled them in. Terek was still shaking when he climbed down the ladder to the mess and found his crew awake, their eyes too bright. The warden stood in the doorway like the idea of safety given form. He wanted to put his head against her and sleep. He settled for sitting on the floor and leaning back until he touched the wall and felt it hold him. What happens now? Someone whispered. Now, Terek said, we fix what we broke and promise not to break it the same way again. If this were a different kind of story, it would end there on a note of small, flagrant hope. But lives are long and full of unexpected corners. There were still harms to come, and choices that drew blood to make. Rumor grew teeth. The story of the human and his impossible warden hardened in mouths that used stories like hammers. Bounty postings appeared, not official but popular. Bring us their beacon, bring us her light, bring us his laugh. The prizes were high. The hungry came. An ambush took them around a small, bright world where the trees grew in spiral cups. They knew better than to land near official docks. They took a clearing miles into the green. That's where the cutters dropped from the sky, painted in bright colors as if to make murder cheerful. Men and women with blank eyes jumped from their ramps sporting jammers that made the Warden stutter. Terk didn't do violence well. He had learned to avoid it because it never gave what it promised and always took more than it threatened. But here it came, and he was a person between his people and harm. He didn't draw a gun. He grabbed a thick branch from the edge of the clearing, hefted it, and planted his feet. The first attacker came at him with a knife big enough to cut a ship's wire bundle. Terk deflected. The branch cracked. He swung again. He saw in flashes his sister as a little girl with her hand in his mother carefully repotting a plant that was nearly dead because she believed it preferred rescue to replacement. Patch's ridiculous insistence on dignity. He saw the Warden's light flicker, struggle. He roared. He hadn't known he had that sound in him. The knife missed him by a rib's width. He kicked. The attacker went down. The second one grabbed him around the chest from behind. He bent through, felt a crack that wasn't his. The branch broke. He didn't stop. The Warden found a small seam in the jammer's logic. She widened it with the kind of patience you use to untangle a child's hair. She transmitted not power but a lullaby into the jammers. Specifically, the sound of Terk's mother singing in a dim habitat cabin when the lights went out during a storm and she had two children scared of the dark. The jammers hiccuped. The lullaby filled the clearing, absurd and tender. The attackers faltered. They weren't built to kill while being sung to like children. A third attacker looked around slowly, dropped their weapon, and sat down hard in the moss as if suddenly remembering gravity works. The cutters lifted and left. The clearing breathed. Terk stood swaying for a long time before his knees gave out and his body remembered how to be one piece. The Warden steadied him without touch. He cried a little then because it had hurt and because he was still here and because the lullaby had unwound something knotted across years. He was not embarrassed. Embarrassment is for safe people. He said hoarse, "Thank you." She answered, "Always." There is a cost to always. It is the price you pay for every promise you mean. The cost came due slowly. Never enough to break them, always enough to remind them they were mortal and the world was complicated. Temeraire's engines needed a complete replacement of a housing so old it had been memorialized in 3 different languages on mechanic forums. Don't push it past half-burn. Do not insult it. Sing to it. They couldn't afford a new one. So they built one, piece by painstaking piece from scrap and bright hope. Patch supervised with tyrannical glee. The Warden watched the rhythmic angle of Terk's shoulders as he worked and found herself memorizing it with the hunger of a pilgrim. She was beginning to realize she had a body after all. It just wasn't made for touch as humans understood it. It was made for presence. And presence here magnified. More light when he laughed. Steadier glow when he slept. They fought off a plague of soft machines on a colony where the children had been drawing smiling faces on their toys, and then watching their toys try to climb toward the sun. It wasn't malicious. It was new life accidentally born from a messy code update. The Warden negotiated with it not in words, but in showing it a place it could grow, directing it to the bones of a dead station in orbit where it could become a garden. The kids cried when the toys left. Then they watched through a borrowed scope as the station lit up with tiny moving lights, and they cried again, softly, and waved. Terk stood with his hands in his pockets and tried not to look like he was crying too. They ate thin some weeks. They feasted others. They argued about trivial things because that's how you keep from drowning in important ones. They danced once, badly and well, in a dockyard to a band that had one drum and refused to stop playing because joy is a machine you keep winding. The Warden didn't dance. She stood just steps away and brightened and dimmed like the breath in a lantern. Terk could feel her light on his skin like weather. Time moved. It does that. It becomes the fabric in which you fold your days. And then the covenant called a conclave. No one alive had seen one. Rumors said they only happened when the covenant changed shape, like a snake shedding, or when something too large to swallow had to be decided in the open or the whole house would collapse. The summons went out on frequencies older than law and newer than shame. Every ship that called itself part of the We heard it, and many who had given up calling themselves anything listened anyway, because you never know when an echo will tell you your name. Temeraire went. Not because they needed permission. Because if you want to change the shape of a story, you have to show up at the place where people pretend stories are facts. The conclave took place in a sphere of space anchored by nothing more than agreement. Ships ranged themselves in rings like wedding bands, like ripples around a stone thrown into a lake. In the middle floated a city that was not a city, built of light and audio and willpower. It had arches with no bridges and balconies, with no railings and windows that opened onto nothing but stars. It was ostentatious in the way people get when they forgot they used to eat with their hands. Temeraire edged into the outer ring. No one stopped them. Next to them drifted a miner's barge with 4 flags tied together for a banner. Beyond, a sleek courier that wore its racing stripes like scars. A few ships glowed with the subdued light of those who had listened, those who remembered braids. A few turned their lights inward. The voice that called order sounded like compromise. It asked for statement. It asked for evidence. It asked for the shape of fear written in syllables and weighed in long words. It asked finally for the Warden. She went, not physically, she stepped into the shared space. Terk felt her absence on the bridge like the moment after a bell stops ringing and you think your ears will burst with silence. He steadied himself and waited. The conclave space filled with light. Some of it was polite. Some of it was righteous. The Warden stood beneath arches held up by nothing and told the story of a planet's heart and a human with patched boots who made a joke because he had no breath left for anything else. She did not ask for permission to exist. She did not apologize for choosing. She asked a question. What were you before? She said to the shape called covenant. And what do you want to be now? The covenant is not a singular mind. It is a choir. That day, the choir split into harmonies that didn't fit neatly on a staff. The old mask tried to sing over the top of them. It kept losing its key. The ships that remembered braids took up a lower part of the melody and held it like a promise. 1,000 speeches condensed into this: fear of chaos, love of order, memory of famine, memory of satire. The Warden listened to them all. Terk stood in the quiet of Temeraire's bridge, and his hands curled on the console until the pain grounded him. When his turn came, and it did, because the conclave needed a human voice and an example to hate or to hear, he spoke plainly. I used to think the universe was a machine that didn't care, he said, and that survival meant tricking it into noticing me. Then I met someone older than law who cared because she remembered what law was for. If you want me to return her to a cage, you will have to kill me. Even then you won't get her back, because she isn't a pet, she's a person, and even a cage can be a person until it decides it is done. He waited for thunder. None came. Just a long hush that felt like the first time you hear a song that will hold you for years. A split. The covenant did not shatter. It did not heal. It moved. Some of the ships, the ones who had listened the first time, broke from the circle and drifted to the Warden, anchoring themselves in orbit around her light like planets around a star. Not many. Enough to matter. Enough to change weight distributions. Others turned their lights inward in a gesture that meant refusal. A few left, engines hot, anger a flag on their tails. The rest stayed and did what most power does when faced with a change it cannot digest. It chose not to decide and called it wisdom. When it was over, the conclave dissolved the way snow melts, slowly, leaving shapes behind. Temeraire turned for open space. How long do you think before they try again? Someone asked on the ship wide. Terk said, it doesn't matter, we know how to endure. The warden did something that she hadn't done before. She touched him, not skin, not even light against light. It was more like a changing of air pressure, a sensation that his cells recognized a friend inside. Does it hurt? He asked breathlessly. A little, she admitted, but some pain feeds flowers. Stay, he said, the most dangerous word, the most tender. Always, she said again, always is a perilous promise. She meant it anyway. They didn't win. Nobody does, not permanently. The station still taxed air. The winter still came. The rich still learned how to evict with a smile. The covenant still threw its weight when it could. But now, when the crushing force came down, sometimes it met an angle. Sometimes it slid off a surface made slippery by laughter, by stubbornness, by a story told at the right time in the right ear. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes is the wedge you build a world on. On a steamship that ferried refugees between bruised moons, the warden taught a child to hum the lullaby that had won a fight. On a mining barge, Terk rewired a switchboard in a way that meant fewer fires. And when the barge's captain insisted on paying, he asked for seeds instead of cash and took them to a station whose grow lamps had dimmed to ember. On a pirate ship that called itself a cooperative and meant it more often than not, they debated law over soup and reached the only conclusion honest people can. That law is a tool you keep sharpening, not a temple where you sleep. The story, of course, changed in the telling. It grew teeth when it moved through cruel mouths. It grew wings when it moved through kind ones. It became a romance ballad, a cautionary tale, a recruitment pitch, a lullaby itself. Terk hated that at first, the loss of control, the ways the truth got bent. The warden put a hand on his shoulder and said, stories are not bricks, they are vines. Vines find light. He learned to let go. He learned you carry what you can and ask for help when your load will break you if you pretend you're not tired. He learned that patch would always pretend it misplaced bolts on purpose. He learned that joy could be a discipline. He learned to sleep when there was nothing more he could do and wake to do it anyway. He learned that desire can begin as a joke you make to mend your breaking and become a vow you keep because it makes the world less cruel. He learned that love is not about entitlement. It is a series of small decisions made in favor of someone else, made again and again until it builds a road you can walk together. Years later, on a day like a held breath, Terk stood on a hill of broken glass under a sky of broken laws and watched a caravan of ships rise from a dock that used to charge for air and now gave away water. The warden stood beside him, casting no shadow in a world that did not know how to hold her. He felt older. He felt exactly himself. "What do you desire now?" she asked. The question was a circle closing. He thought about pretending to joke and found he had no need. "A day without fear," he said, then another, and after that, "sunlight," he said, "the kind that doesn't ask for proof." She made the bell sound that meant laughter. He reached out his hand and didn't touch her and felt nonetheless touched. A siren wailed in the distance, far, a reminder that nothing stays quiet, but it did not reach them here. The ships rose, and people on their decks raised their hands. Terk raised his. He wasn't a symbol. He was a man with sore knees and a ship that rattled and friends who loved him and a galaxy that would never stop being complicated. It was enough. Night came, then dawn, then work, always work, the good kind, the kind that uses up your fear like fuel and leaves you warmed. When the covenant finally came again, it came in twos, one ship with old light, one with new. They approached politely. They hailed. "We have revised protocols," said the voice that might have been a mask with the edges softened. "We seek not to limit, but to learn." "That was always the point," Terk said, and leaned back in his chair. He could hear his mother humming in the galley. He could hear his sister laughing with someone on a crackling connection. He could feel the warden's presence like a vector map overlaying his bones. Patch zipped by chasing a sound only it could hear. A million small survivals made a shape you could live in. It wasn't tidy, it was theirs. Temeraire answered the hail, the warden spoke, the covenant listened. Somewhere a child learned to braid and tied their hair with a ribbon the color of new promises. Somewhere else a mechanic etched a name in a panel and didn't tell anyone. Somewhere a dog that used to be a hound danced, clumsy and glorious. There were still hard days. There would always be. If hope were easy, it would be as common as air. That's why humans, in their ragged, ridiculous persistence, made it new every morning and called it coffee. And on a night when the stars hung low like streetlights, and you could pretend for a second that space was a neighborhood and grief was a woman shaking your hand and saying, "See you tomorrow," Vale stood beside the warden at the edge of a dock and watched a fleet of tiny ships launch into the dark like seeds flung by a farmer's calloused hand. He took a long breath. He let it out. The warden looked at him. He looked back. "You asked me once what I desired," he said softly. "Yes. I desire this," he said, and swept a hand out at the world, at ships punching lanes into the night, at people choosing, at a law learning to listen, at a woman made of light who had removed her chains because a man too tired to lie had told a joke as a prayer. "I desire this to continue past me." "It will," she said, "because even when you are gone, you are not, you are the riverbed, the water remembers." He nodded. He did not cry. Some nights he did. On this night he smiled like a man who had learned, finally, to use the light he had. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, thank you for listening. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.